Jonas Reed pushed a frayed ration token across the registry counter, and Etta Finch's pen froze over the open ledger. Suspicion tightened in Etta's throat as she watched the token slide and thought of the ledger's stamped column. The hesitation showed on her face. "Please, Jonas," keeping his voice low, "my child needs winter bread." The ledger lay between them, brass embossing catching the lamplight. Mr. Calder stood behind Etta with his spectacles low, instructing her with a single measured nod. The conflict was immediate. Follow the instruction to lower Jonas's standing, or refuse and risk the penalties for tampering. Etta kept her hands steady and let doubt sit under her ribs while she read the line aloud. She did not say her name, but the registry clerk beside her had known Etta since apprenticeship. The staff called her Finch and expected obedience. The ledger recorded ration allotments, housing allocations, and the stamped marks that made or unmade a household's winter. Etta's doubt shifted into precise questions. Jonas, how many mouths? Jonas answered with the child's small shoe tucked at his hip and the number 3 pressed into the space between his fingers. Myth. Calder's voice cut in. Record 3, then 2, he said. The ledger shows inadequate contribution. Adjust accordingly. His tone carried the registry's authority. Etta's hand hovered. The pen tip made a small ink ring on the page. She heard the scrape of a chair as young clerk Rowan watched with a careful face. Etta felt the first change in her feelings. Suspicion had become unease, then a quiet resistance forming behind her ribs. Jonas kept his gaze on the counter. He spoke less than anyone else, but his voice held concrete need. "We had a bad harvest. Jonas, my wife is ill. I traded a coat for coal for the boy." He set a calloused hand on the counter. The register's window glass threw back their faces in dim chiaroscuro. Etta looked at Jonas's hands and saw old cuts that matched the records for a decade of labor. The ledger's stamped column read a small, white number that would cut his allotment. After the man left, Calder lowered the brass, embossed ledger and made his reproach soft and flat. "Etta," he said, "hesitation is contagious in this office. The ledger is the law." The reproach included a quiet lesson. The ledger's stamps governed rations and roofs and work assignments. Etta moved to the clerk's alcove as mere. Calder explained the scale of consequences, and her doubt shifted again into a sharper, more alert concern. She listened to him lay out how a single downgrade reduced a family's standing, which in turn changed housing bans and scheduled relocations. They stood amid shelves of ledgers that smelled of oil and cold ink. Young clerk Rowan placed a thin stack of papers under a lamp. He had a nervous fidget and kept glancing toward the public window. "We do what must be done, Finch." "Mayor." Calder, you know why? Etta's fingers tightened on the ledger's edge. She understood how large systems consumed small lives. She had recorded births and deaths with the same hand. The conversation contained no shouting, but its facts carried the registry's weight. Etta returned to the back ledger room to tally incoming requests. Alone, she let her eyes move over rows of stamped columns and neat marginal notes. Her fingers found a folded sheet tucked behind a ledger spine. She unfolded it with the care she used for fragile receipts. There was a concealed column of stamped marks that did not match the public rubric posted for citizens. The marks were precise black slashes and small letters next to names, a private code that paired low stamps with other notations. Her initial doubt hardened into alarm when she read a line that paired a low mark with a term she did not recognize. She called Rowan over. "Rowan, come look at this," she said. He leaned in, pale light on his face. "What is this column?" Rowan's fingers hovered. He ran his thumb along the paper's edge. "I thought it was an old tally, Rowan. But these letters are recent." The exchange moved the plot forward. There was now a discovery that might change how Etta viewed her work. The first emotion shift had started with suspicion, progressed to unease, then to alarm. Etta's movements became deliberate. She traced a name and matched it with a sealed envelope on the shelf. She found differences. Public entries showed a simple deservingness score, while the secret column added a paired mark and a date. The marks aligned with envelopes labeled for scheduled removals from town. Etta felt fear press into the back of her throat. She checked the clock and realized dusk would bring the closing of the registry and the posting of that day's downgrades. An external event interrupted her search. Jonas returned. His coat was thinner and the child's shoe now had a patched sole. He stood again at the window and did not speak at first. He laid a small envelope on the counter and looked straight at Etta. "Etta," he said, "they told me to wait another week, but my daughter coughs at night. I came earlier before the lines grew." His presence forced a new choice. The tension rose. Etta felt the second emotion shift. Alarm moved into protective resolve. Calder arrived at the central table while Etta examined the secret marks. He explained the system with a brittle calm. "The registry is impartial," he said. "We do not punish without basis." His voice carried the state's vocabulary. Etta replied, "Then explain this column." She tapped the folded sheet on the table. "Explain why these names link to removal schedules." "Mer." Calder kept his hands folded and let a quiet figure of authority take shape. A short argument unfolded. "Mer." "Calder, this is not in the public rubric." "Etta, who authorized it?" He adjusted his spectacles and said, "Authorized by those who ensure order. Procedure preserves the many." Etta shot back. "The many includes children who will freeze if you stamp a lower allotment." The exchange contained quick back and forth lines, each revealing character priorities. Jonas's breathing sharpened in the doorway. Their voices stayed measured, but the content escalated. "Etta, Calder, you risk your position by questioning this, so do you?" Etta replied, "You risk being the man who sent families out in winter." Rowan swallowed. "We can appeal, perhaps," he suggested. "Appeals go nowhere." Calder answered. The argument had 5 short lines and ended on a threat. Calder reminded Etta of penalties for tampering and spoke of enforced relocations for those downgraded. The danger became concrete. Rowan fumbled near a shelf and knocked a stack of envelopes. A sealed directive fell out and hit the floor with a dull slap. Etta crouched and read the label. The directive paired certain low stamps with scheduled departures from town. The thin paper listed times and destinations. Etta felt a hollow click beneath her ribs as the office's bureaucratic cruelty revealed a program of removal. She read aloud a time and a location, and Jonas heard his village named on the list. For a moment there was only sound. The scratch of ink, a child's small breath at the window, the quiet metallic click of Calder's pocket watch. Etta's hand closed over the folded slip in her palm. She weighed the penalties versus the person who stood at the counter. She felt the third emotion shift. Protective resolve moved into risk, calculated defiance. Etta decided to act. She walked to the central ledger table where Calder sat and set the folded slip on the page. "Mr. Calder," she said, voice steady, "this slip contradicts the rubric. Either we correct the rubric publicly or we do not use secret marks." He did not answer immediately. He lifted the brass, embossed ledger and placed it between them. The ledger was the arena. Jonas watched with his jaw clenched. Rowan stood to the side like a thin line of possible witness. Etta made a deliberate movement and either altered Jonas's stamped slip or refused to apply the downgrade. She slid the pen across the paper in a slow, visible gesture. Calder slammed his hand on the ledger with a sound that echoed. "Do it properly, Finch," he said, "or I will sign the downgrade myself." His threat was calm, but it held the power to summon enforcement. Etta's heart beat fast. She felt her fingers tremble and steadied them by gripping the pen more tightly. A rapid confrontation followed. "Etta, give me the pen." Calder, "No, Etta, give me the ledger," he answered. Jonas stepped forward. Calder, "Please, Jonas, I've done my part." The exchange included 3 quick lines, each pushing the stakes. Mr. Calder reached for the ledger. Etta held the page open with her thumb. The ledger's pages rustled and dust fell into the lamp's small pool of light. Guards were summoned. The sound arrived as a heavy boot on the registry vestibule. Etta had seconds to decide. She tore a slip from the ledger or tucked a secret page into her satchel. In the same motion she slid a marked envelope into her pocket. Her hand made a small, precise movement that would matter later. Jonas tried to move toward the door and was stopped by a guard's hand on his sleeve. He looked to Etta and mouthed, "Why?" She could not answer aloud without revealing herself. Mr. Calder sealed his decision with the registry's stamped seal and slid a wooden box toward the clerk. He dropped a stamped slip into it with a soft sound. The room contracted to that small noise. Jonas was led to the vestibule and then into the street while the child clung to his hand. Etta watched them leave. She felt a tightness at her sternum and a coldness in her fingers, not from the lamp, but from the knowledge of what the stamped slip would do. After the confrontation, the office emptied except for Etta and the ledger shelves. Mr. Calder retreated to his small office and shut the door with a legal finality. Rowan stood awkwardly by the shelving. Etta sat at an empty table and unfolded the slip she had hidden in her satchel. It contained the secret column with marks that paired names to removals. She pressed the paper flat and noted a small marginal note she had not seen earlier, a signature and a code. The discovery suggested a higher authority issuing directives. Etta realized the ledger was not a neutral record but an instrument of policy. The realization shifted her emotion again. She felt anger grow where raw fear had been. She made a quiet oath in action, not allowed to keep one slip hidden and to watch how the registry acted. She folded the secret page and slid it into the inside pocket of her coat. That movement was concrete, a small act of defiance that required no flourish. Night settled and the registry lights guttered. Etta watched from a side window as Jonas walked into the mist with the child, the frames of their coats dimming into the street lamps. "Missa!" Calder's office glowed with the small lamplight of his pocket watch and the rustle of papers. Etta sat alone, hands folded around a cup of water, the secret slip warming slowly against her chest. She felt fatigue and an aching certainty that the ledger's private column would cost lives if left unchecked. Before dawn, an unexpected moment occurred. Rowan knocked on Etta's table and pushed a small, crumpled envelope toward her. "Etta," he said, voice low, "I kept a copy." He pointed to a set of marks he had transcribed. His action changed everything. The young clerk's choice showed that others in the office were uneasy. Etta read the copy and matched it to the original. The documents aligned. Rowan had watched the removal schedules. He had seen names she had recorded with her own hand. They spoke in short lines. "Rowan, did you tell anyone?" "Ita, no, Rowan, not yet. We cannot act alone," Etta replied. "We must do something that cannot be traced to one pair of hands." The two made a plan in small steps. Copy, hide, and wait for a single public contradiction that would force the registry to reveal its private marks. It was a slow plan, requiring patience and stealth. Etta felt resolve settle into a cold, precise intention. The chapter's midpoint offered a mini cliffhanger. Etta discovered in the sealed directive a place name she recognized, a workhouse on the River Road listed for removals next Wednesday. The knowledge made the threat immediate. Etta could wait and watch or attempt to delay the scheduled departure by raising a public objection. The choice poised the story on a knife. Etta closed the ledger and looked at Mr. Calder's closed door, knowing she had time measured by days, not weeks. She left the office with the secret slip tucked inside her satchel. The lamplight carved a small rectangle on the cobblestones. Outside, the air smelled of coal and wet leather. Etta walked without haste but with a destination. She would visit the woman who mended coats across the lane. The woman who often saw families in need and could corroborate the claim that Jonas had traded a coat for coal. Etta wanted witness statements recorded outside the registry's control. On the way, she ran into Jonas at a market stall. He had come early to trade odd jobs for a sack of flour. They exchanged a few words. "Jonas, Etta, I will try. Stay in the parish tonight." Jonas nodded and handed her a small talisman he always wore. "Keep it safe," he said. The exchanged object fixed their relationship in physical form. Jonas left with a hope that Etta could translate into action. Back at the registry, Etta and Rowan began a quiet campaign. They copied entries onto separate sheets marked contradictions and left marginal notes that looked like routine corrections. They used ink smudges and small scratches to make the copies appear ordinary. Each new action increased danger. Each copied line was a seed that might sprout into exposure. The office's rhythm continued, but Etta now worked with a different heartbeat. Mr. Calder remained outwardly composed, but Etta noted small tells. He tapped his watch more often, adjusted his spectacles with brisker motions, and kept the stamped seal within reach. She recorded these details because small habits reveal larger intentions. She began to see the registry as a machine of decisions, and she saw where a single stamped slip could funnel a family into removal. A surprise twist arrived. While searching a ledger shelf for an innocuous record, Etta found an older entry in midder. Calder's handwriting that named a friend of his as being spared a removal for reasons of service to the office. The discovery suggested favoritism and a motive for secrecy beyond strict impartiality. Etta realized that the secret column could be used not only to punish but to protect the registry's allies. The twist reoriented her understanding of mither. Calder from merely rigid to self-preserving. Later, Etta confronted Calder again with the older entry. This spares your friend. She said this is not impartial. Calder's face tightened. That entry predates the directive. He said circumstances differ. The exchange had a pointed edge. Etta watched his fingers and felt she had placed a lever in a specific joint of the machinery. She and Rowan now held information that might topple a policy or ruin them both. They planned a single concrete test. On the morning the workhouse escort was scheduled to collect downgraded families, Etta would raise a public correction at the registry counter, citing a clerical error. If the registry corrected the public rubric, it would reveal, by omission or by reaction, the existence of the private column. If it did not, the removal would proceed and the names would be lost. The plan required timing, witnesses, and a willingness to risk immediate exposure. Night fell and Etta placed the hidden slip under the lamp and measured the ink's dryness. She wrote a short note and tucked it with the copy Rowan had made. She rehearsed the lines she would speak at the counter. She would do it in plain language and in the presence of witnesses. This entry does not match the public rubric. I ask for correction. The rehearsed words felt small but dangerous when spoken aloud. She felt her final emotion shift. The previous fear and anger matured into a cool, committed courage. At dawn the street was wet and silent. Etta walked to the registry with the note in her pocket and Rowan at her elbow. Jonas's child slept under a borrowed shawl. The stage was set. Etta pushed open the registry door and saw Mr. Calder already there, standing like a man with a ledger ready to open. She stepped to the counter and put her hand on the page where the public rubric lay. She spoke plainly and in front of the waiting line. This entry is incorrect. Etta, I request an immediate correction, the registry murmured. Calder's face held a line of calm. Etta, make the request in writing and I will consider it. Etta had prepared for delay. She laid Rowan's copied sheet on the counter and watched faces shift. The public would see a clerk requesting a routine correction. The private column's existence might be exposed by the registry's reaction. The clerk at the desk called for Mr. Calder's inspection. He came forward and opened the ledger. For a breath nothing happened but the rustle of pages. Mr. Calder lifted his spectacles and scanned the entries. He did not show panic, yet his hands trembled slightly as he flipped to the folded sheet Etta had set earlier. He found the matching note and then closed the ledger slowly. The registry's routine had been interrupted. A guard cleared his throat and the room tightened. Calder chose to seal the ledger in front of everyone and to move the discussion to his office. He quietly, "We will deal with this privately." Etta felt a temporary disappointment. The public correction had not forced an immediate reveal. But then Rowan stepped forward and, with a voice he steadied, asked the clerk to read aloud the public rubric's criteria. The clerk complied, and the room heard the official standard that did not contain the private marks. With the public criteria read aloud, a small but critical change occurred. Some citizens in the waiting line recognized the discrepancy and spoke up. A woman said, "My husband was marked last week." Another man added, "They sent my brother to the workhouse despite good standing." Voices multiplied. The registry could no longer claim the private column was irrelevant. The external pressure had begun to shift institutional inertia. Calder excused himself and left the counter in a tight spiral of purpose. Etta watched him depart and felt the chapter's climax move into motion. The point of peak danger had been reached. The ledger was being challenged in public, and the registry's private marks could be exposed. Etta had moved from suspicion to action to a deliberate test, and the consequences now assembled around the table like the registry's own shadow. The chapter closed not with a final resolution, but with a concrete action that set all consequences into motion. Etta walked to the registry vestibule and tucked a folded copy of the secret slip into a wall crevice she knew maintenance rarely checked. She stepped back and let a guard pass, and then she left the building with Rowan at her side. Jonas's name remained on the scheduled removal list, but now officials in the waiting room questioned the registry's integrity. Outside, Jonas stood under the lamplight and met Etta's eyes. He held his daughter's hand tighter. "Jonas, what happens now?" She could not promise safety. Instead, she said, "We make them answer in public tomorrow." She folded her hands to show no flourish, only a plan. The chapter ends on a clear action. Etta had hidden a document, planted evidence, and triggered a public contradiction that would force a response on the workhouse schedule. The last sound in the registry as she left was the ledger's slow close and the distant footfall of guards walking toward the night. Emotion root. Suspicion guided Etta's first step. It turned into unease, then alarm, then protective resolve, and finally quiet courage. The chapter resolves its immediate conflict. The registry's private marks have been discovered and exposed to public scrutiny. Etta has hidden proof and mobilized witnesses. The final beat is concrete and forward, moving, a guarded promise that the next day will bring a confrontation with consequences already set in motion. Etta arrived before the doors opened and found Mr. Calder alone beneath the swung oil lamp. Suspicion tightened her chest before she spoke. She watched him press a stamped slip into an envelope and slide his thumb over the seal. The sight was a physical thing. Brass seal impressions, a hand that hesitated, a small ribbon folded under the paper. The problem was immediate and concrete. The slip bore a lower grade than the one on Jonas Reed's file the clerk had prepared the day before. Etta stepped forward and set down the ledgers she carried. She had handled Jonas Reed's ration token yesterday at the public counter. She remembered the frayed thread on the token and the way Jonas's hand trembled when he pushed it across the wood. That memory lived in the ledger now. The entry Etta had read with her pen poised still had ink from the morning. She set the smaller leather ledger on the table beside Mea. Calder, and kept her hands above the paper where he could see them. Mr. Calder, she said, and kept her voice steady. This slip is for Jonas Reed, is it not? Calder's head rose slowly. He did not smile. He adjusted his spectacles and folded the slip once more before he answered Etta. He said, "You should not be here before hours. Take the ledgers to the clerk room." His hand closed on the envelope. She did not leave. Etta moved closer enough to read the stamped grade through the envelope's fold. The stamp's impression had a harsher line than the ledger's penned note. She could feel suspicion turning to something tighter along her jaw. She could not ignore it. "Calder," she said again, softer. "The grade on that slip does not match the ledger I prepared." He tilted the envelope, then the lamp, and the ink showed. "We have a quota, Etta. Records must reflect effectual standing. You know the rubric." His voice was measured. The pocket watch at his waist ticked. He lifted the sealed envelope and set it toward the locked drawer. Etta's mouth went dry. The registry's rubric was not abstract in her life. It decided whether a child had porridge the next week. It decided if a woman could keep the embers in her hearth. Jonas's plea at the counter yesterday, his low voice, his hands clenching the frayed token, played across her thoughts as a concrete sound. She stepped closer and put her palm on the table. "Mr. Calder." "Etta, may I see the file before it goes into the drawer?" Calder's fingers tightened. He folded his hands as if he were arranging the weight of the entire office. "No clerk may interfere with sealed submissions," he said. "Procedure protects the registry." He used the word procedure as a shield. Etta pressed her chin down. Her hesitation lasted 3 counts. Then she spoke with the kind of bluntness she used when signing ledgers. "If the sealed slip lowers Jonas Reed's grade, his ration token will be ineffective. His child will go hungry." The lamp threw a thin circle of light across Calder's face. He set the envelope into the drawer and turned the key. The metal bit clicked. "We are not a pantry, Etta," he replied. "We are a registry. We keep order so the city stands." Her suspicion shifted into a quiet anger. Order is not a ration, order is paper. People are not paper." She sounded calmer than she felt. Calder's jaw tightened. He tapped the desk with the heel of his hand. "You are sentimental, Etta. You think about faces. I think about functioning systems." His tone did not rise. It relied on the ledger's authority. The bell in the vestibule rang to mark the opening hour. The office door thudded as petitioners stepped onto the stone. Etta folded the ledgers under her arm and moved toward the public counter, placing herself between the waiting crowd and the locked drawer. Jonas arrived then, shorter than she expected in the morning light, his coat frayed near the cuffs, his cap clasped to his chest. He kept his voice low when he spoke. "Miss Finch, any word?" His fingers brushed the leather of his satchel as if checking for a token within. Etta could see the sleep at the corners of his eyes and the way his shoulders carried the weight of his household. She looked at him and told him the truth she had just forced from the senior registrar. I saw Mr. Calder with the sealed envelope. I could not confirm the grade yet. That answer hung between them like a small, brittle pane of glass. Jonas swallowed. He leaned on the counter and said, "Please, Miss Finch, my daughter." His voice stopped as a municipal attendant steered him into the queue of petitioners. He kept his gaze low and rubbed his hands together where the chill lay. A short while later, Mr. Calder called the clerks to a quick meeting. He gathered Mara, Rowan, Etta, and the archivist at the low table by the stacks. Etta felt the room constrict under the weight of ledgers and the smell of ink. Calder placed a thin packet of papers on the table and pushed it forward. "We have a mandate," he said. "Quotas tighten this quarter. The rubric for usefulness has been updated." He glanced at each clerk and let the silence measure them. "We will expedite classifications. The city requires efficient distribution. Clerks must sharpen their judgment." Mara's hand went to her mouth. She had been at the counter last week and marked 3 households as stable. "How will this change our entries, Mr. Calder?" Calder tapped the new rubric with a pen. "We will adjust grades downward where labor output is insufficient. Where households rely excessively on rations, we assign a lower score. It is not a punishment. It is triage." He spoke as a man who believed his words were instruments. Rowan, who kept his hair tied and his ledger neat, said, "This will affect many files. The stacks will not bear the reclassifications silently. We need time to cross-check." His voice carried the archivist's caution. Calder's eyes narrowed. "Time is a luxury we do not have. Cross-check where you can. Follow the rubric. The sealed slips will be final." He closed the meeting with a hand that made the papers sound rectangular. Etta left the table with a list of names assigned that morning. She walked past the records alcove and paused. Rowan lingered behind her and beckoned. They moved between the stacks where the light fell into narrower veins. "Show me Jonas's file," Rowan quietly. "We should confirm what the ledger says before he goes to the counter." His voice did not ask permission. It suggested a plan. Etta pulled the file from the shelf. The folder smelled of damp pages and ledger dust. She opened it with fingers that had written many names into columns. The official slip from yesterday lay folded against Jonas's record. Etta set it on the table and ran a fingertip along the penciled note she had written when Jonas pushed his ration token across the counter and begged for a week's help. That memory, the frayed token, the ink smudge, was concrete and separate. It did not soften into metaphor. Rowan paused over the stack and found a folded slip tucked between entries. He held it up without ceremony. The paper was not on the file's seal list. It had no clerk's initial. The stamp impression looked like the one Calder used, but the ink was damp in a way that suggested it had been placed more recently than the ledger's date. "Who put this here?" Etta. "Rowan. It was tucked after the file was closed. Someone with access to the drawer could have slipped it inside." His fingers found the ribbon mark that suggested forced insertion. He spoke as if naming a rote. That discovery moved suspicion into alarm. Etta felt the muscles along her neck tighten. She slid the folded paper beneath the lamp and set her chin on her fist. The office carried on outside the alcove, a woman arguing with a clerk, a child calling for sweet bread, a municipal attendant stamping tokens. The registry's routine continued while the file itself had been altered. They put the unofficial slip aside and ran the ledger numbers again. Each entry matched except the stamped grade. Whoever altered the slip had not changed the entire file. They had replaced the grade and left the ledger note untouched. The action suggested intent and access. "Rowan, this is not clerical error. This is interference." Etta felt a small shift in her thinking then. She had begun with suspicion of Calder. Now she considered a new possibility. Someone else, someone who could reach the sealed drawer when the office was unattended. The idea introduced dread. She folded her hands and kept her voice low. "We must be careful with this," she said. "If we speak of it wrongly, someone will seal the file again and no one will see the substitution." Her fingers brushed the edge of the folded slip as if touching a place wound. They moved swiftly. Etta made a duplicate note in her small ledger and slipped Rowan a page with a pencil tally. The motion was quiet, but it placed a record in 2 hands. Mara appeared then to collect a stack of petitions. She glanced at the file and asked, "Is Jonas being heard now?" "Etta her. He will be called this hour. We found an altered slip." Mara's face lost color. She had a habit of biting her lip when afraid. "We should present what we found to Mr. Calder," she said. They approached Calder at the public counter where a line of petitioners waited. Jonas stood at the head of the queue. His cap was in his hands and he kept looking toward the clerk window. The municipal attendant kept a neutral posture beside him. Calder read from the sealed envelope without looking up. He unhooked the slip and spoke each word in the registry's formal tone. Jonas Reed, grade reassigned as marginal, ration allocation reduced. Effective immediately, he folded the slip and let it fall into the wooden registry box. Jonas's voice broke when he spoke. "Calder, please. My child needs food. The token." He held up the frayed ration token for the clerks and for the room to see. The token trembled in his hand like a small, desperate thing. Etta reached forward, palm flat on the counter. "Mitt. Calder, there is a note tucked in his file that suggests the stamped grade was altered after submission," she said. "We found it in the records alcove." Calder's hand moved to the wooden box as if to block her words physically. "No clerk may interrupt the recording of a sealed decision," he said. "The seal marks finality." "Etta, if the stamp was altered, the decision is not final. You must review the file before enforcing any change." Her voice rose a fraction. Her pen tapped between her fingers. The municipal attendant stepped forward. "Sir, we have a queue. People wait. We cannot delay for every complaint. Hear it as a civic fact." Calder banged his palm on the counter once. The sound snapped attention. "This is final. Jonas Reed's grade is recorded. The registry must proceed." His tone turned cruelly administrative. "Miss Finch, you will file your note and continue." "There is no room for sentiment in official counts," 3 petitioners in line murmured in response. A woman with a child pulled her shawl closer. The room's hum tightened around Jonas like a rope. He pressed his forehead into his palm and spoke under it. "Mr. Calder, Miss Finch, there was a substitution. A slip was placed after hours. Will you at least inspect the file?" His words were small, but the question carried the urgency of hunger. Calder flicked his spectacles and recited the rubric in a brief phrase. "We cannot reopen sealed decisions for every claim. The registry cannot be paralyzed by every doubt. The system must run." He slid the stamped slip into the wooden box and let the lid fall. Etta stepped forward and laid her ledger flat on the counter so the room could see her handwriting. She did not beg. She read aloud the notation she had left after Jonas's plea. "Jonas Reed came yesterday with a frayed ration token and asked for support for his child," she said. "The file records labor output consistent with his claim. The newly stamped slip lowers his grade below what the ledger indicates." Calder's color flitted. He looked past the ledgers to the municipal attendant, and then at the waiting petitioners. He replied, "The ledger is one memory. The sealed slip carries the authority of the office. This is final." He pronounced final as if it were a tool. Jonas's hands curled around the frayed token. He spoke with the same quiet that had carried his earlier plea. "Mr. Calder, if you deny us the ration, my daughter will have no porridge. Miss Finch knows this. Rowan knows this. Please." The municipal attendant moved as if to guide him away. A clerk in the back Mara cleared her throat. "Mr. Calder, I was at the market yesterday. I saw Jonas lift sacks for 3 days straight. He sweated and his hands were raw. He is not idle. If the rubric is applied, will the new threshold account for work like that?" Her voice pushed into the formal armor of procedure. Calder's fingers traced the lip of the wooden box. He looked at Mara and then at the slip he had sealed. The rubric accounts for output and household need. It is not a ledger of visible labor alone. We must consider efficiency. "A yard of effort does not always produce the required return," Mara answered. "Then we must also consider what that return costs. If families cannot keep embers, they cannot produce anything. Efficiency without fuel is empty." Her voice held a clerk's impatience. For a moment, a different motion passed through the room. A clerk's argument, short and sharp, a back and forth of 3 lines. Etta watched the exchange and felt her suspicion harden into a decision. She had reached a point where silence would feel like consent. Calder's reply was blunt. "Miss Finch, return to your desk, file your notes. There is an inquest if you wish, but it will not halt the registry's operations." He looked at Jonas and made the flip of an official hand. The municipal attendant stepped forward and put a hand at Jonas's elbow. 2 other petitioners stared down. Jonas's face reddened with the strain of trying not to collapse into plea. He allowed himself to be guided toward the door. On the steps outside, a small crowd gathered and recoiled as the attendant steered him away. Etta felt exposed before the waiting room. The clerks averted their eyes. Calder called for her name and demanded she account for her hesitation. He kept his phrasing formal, but the demand had teeth. "Miss Finch, why did you hesitate at the counter?" She answered plainly, "I hesitated because I saw an altered slip in Jonas Reed's file, and I wanted to ask before the seal was enforced." Her breath came even. She did not back down. "Calder, you will set an account for that hesitation. Procedure requires documentation of any clerk action that interferes with final recordings." He wrote a short note on a scrap and slid it toward her. "Sign. Explain. We cannot permit clerks to undermine the registry." Etta took the scrap and signed. Her signature was small and neat. Signing felt like recording a personal mark into a ledger that might later be used to measure her own usefulness. She set the scrap in her satchel and walked back into the alcove with Rowan. The rest of the afternoon blurred with petitions and stamped slips. Etta moved through names as if through a list of small emergencies. Each face at the counter required a precise phrase, a pen stroke, an item to be checked. Her hands kept touching the pencil mark she had set beside Jonas's file. The unofficial folded slip sat in her palm all afternoon because she had not yet decided what to do with it. At dusk, when the last petitioner left, Etta waited until the lamplight threw long rectangles across the floor. She locked the front door and walked back to her desk. She lit her small oil lamp on a chain and laid out the day's ledgers. Her mind moved from suspicion to resolve and then to fear. The fear was not abstract. It was the practical dread that came when one considered the consequences of a small act. She opened Jonas's file again. The altered slip was folded like a narrow card. She slid a worn ribbon from her satchel and placed it against the ledger where her penciled note sat. The ribbon was a small, brittle thing she had kept for years. It had no authority, only a promise. Etta took a pen and wrote a marginal note in a clerk's hand. A small correction cue, an asterisk with a tracer line to a page number. She did not falsify the ledger. She added a clerk's observational note in plain ink. "Alternate record. Plea noted. Possible substitution. Recommend review." Etta Finch. She folded the slip back into place and tucked the ribbon into the file as a marker only she would recognize. Her action moved resolve into a quieter determination. She knew the risks. Calder could rid the marginalia and punish hesitation. The registry could force her to account publicly. She knew the ledger's authority matched the city's needs more than an individual child's hunger. Still, she could not leave Jonas without any record to follow. Rowan had promised to check the locked drawer's access logs. Mara had agreed to keep an eye on the municipal attendants' rounds. They had become not merely colleagues but small conspirators in a delicate task. Etta rested her palm on the ribbon and felt its thread catch under her skin like a pact. She stood and blew out the lamp. The office went dark in an instant save for the weak glow beneath the senior registrar's door. She tucked the file back on the shelf, ribbon inside, ledger edge aligned with the other documents. Her hands smelled of ink and oil. At the top of the stair she paused and looked at Calder's door. The brass, embossed ledger on his desk caught a sliver of light. She did not touch the door. Instead, she left the office with the small ledger she kept, the one with the worn bookmark. Her final act before stepping into the night was to fold the marginal note into the ledger and place it beneath the ribbon so the mark would not be lost if anyone checked her desk hastily. Outside, the street smelled of peat smoke and boiled cabbage. Jonas's figure had already gone. Etta walked home with her satchel heavier by the weight of her choice. She had enacted a small breach and had made a promise to a man she barely knew beyond a ledger note and a frayed token. The registry's machinery had ground on, a sealed slip had been dropped into a wooden box, a life had shifted under it. She thought of Mither. Calder's measured words about order, and of Mara's sharp insistence that fuel mattered. She thought of Rowan's slow caution, and of Jonas's low voice asking for porridge. Suspicion had led to confrontation. Confrontation had revealed interference. Interference required action. She would not stop the registry by herself, but she had left a trace. That trace might be enough. The chapter closed with a concrete, irreversible act. Etta placed the ribbon within Jonas Reed's file and left a clerk's note that pointed to a specific page and a recommended review. She locked her own ledger and set it beneath her pillow for safekeeping. Outside her window a cart rattled over cobbles, and someone called a child's name once before it faded. She lay awake just long enough to feel the thread of consequence tighten at the base of her fingers. Then she slept with the sound of a city at work in her ears. Emotion root, suspicion, emotion shifts, suspicion, anger, alarm, resolve, quiet, determination. The constable shoved Jonas Reed forward across the registry counter and said, "This is the final review." Suspicion tightened Etta Finch's throat as she let her pen hover above the ledger and watched the battered token slide toward her. She recognized Jonas at once, the frayed ration token, his threadbare cap, the way he kept his gaze low. Suspicion was the first thing she felt, and it set her hands to work with a careful slowness. Etta did not speak. She folded the token under a scrap of paper and turned Jonas's file toward the lamplight. The ledger's stamped column waited like a verdict. The problem was plain within those opening motions. The registry would decide how much food a child would have this week. That was the concrete stake. She thought of the folded slip she had found once, tucked behind a ledger in a quiet alcove, and of Mir. Calder sliding a stamped slip into an envelope the night she came early. She had seen his thumb press the seal. She had seen the slightest tremor in his fingers. Etta's suspicion shifted to doubt when she checked Jonas's notes and found a slip behind the file that did not match the ledger's entries. She lifted the slip with 2 fingers and held it to the lamp. The ink was the same, but the notation was different. The slip recorded a lower standing, an extra stamp that had no place in the ledger's sequence. Doubt tightened her jaw. She tapped the page twice with her pen as if the sound might test the paper's truth. "Etta," the constable said, leaning on the counter, "it's late." He was blunt, the kind of man who shortened sentences until they were commands. "The registrar needs a decision." Jonas's voice came afterward, small and steady. "Please, Etta." "My child." Jonas's plea landed and moved Etta again, this time toward resolve. She had watched him push a frayed ration token across this same counter before. She remembered his hands, knuckles raw from work, and the worried line near his mouth. She saw his wife handing him a boiled root for supper that morning. She could picture the child's thin blanket when she had served in the ration line that week. Sympathy was not enough. She needed proof. Etta slid the slip back into the file carefully and caught Mr. Calder's eye across the room. "Meh!" Calder stood under the swung oil lamp, hands folded, spectacles catching a bright point of light. He did not look surprised. His face had the steady, ordered look of a man who believed the ledger kept the town together. His voice had always been measured. When he walked toward the counter now, his steps were precise. "Mir." Calder, Etta, holding the ledger open with one hand. "This slip doesn't match the register." Her voice was soft but held a sharp edge. "Ma." Calder adjusted his spectacles. The brass of the bridge glinting under the lamp. "Bring the file forward, Etta," he said. "We follow the record." His hand indicated the stamped column, the brass seal on his ribbon catching the light. He did not ask what she had seen. He redirected the procedure. Etta's doubt shifted again, this time into a quiet determination. She guided the file toward the small filing alcove beside the registrar's desk with a deliberate slowness that kept the constable's impatience at bay. The room smelled of paper and oil. She reached into the slot behind the ledger and pulled out the slip she had found earlier. It was the same shape as others but folded differently, its fold uneven where someone had reopened it. She compared the slip to the ledger line by line. The ledger showed Jonas's service entries, a small column for dependents, an unremarkable tally. The slip recorded an extra stamp in the negative column. Etta traced the stamped impression with a finger and found a slight smudge where the brass seal had brushed the edge of the paper. That smudge matched other papers she had seen in the back filing room, the bundle she had once noticed tucked beneath a ledger on a shelf. An external event interrupted the quiet. The constable cleared his throat and stepped closer. "We need the ruling, clerk." He put one palm on the counter and watched the ledger as if the book itself might answer his impatience. Jonas shifted his weight, rubbed his hands together and said, "My wife is ill. Please, Mr. Calder. Etta, I have nowhere else to go." His words were short and heavy. Etta turned back and saw Mr. Calder's jaw tighten. "We have the law," Mr. Calder replied. "We keep order." His voice was a small, flat enforcement. Jonas's posture folded in on itself. He kept his voice low and steady. "My child's fever took what little we had. Without a proper standing, Jonas read. The constable said, names only at the counter. He stilled Jonas with a look. Mr. Calder watched Etta for an answer. The situation forced her to choose quickly. Follow procedure without question, or look deeper and risk confrontation. Etta stepped aside and said nothing. She moved to the back filing room, her lamp swinging from the chain at her hip, the thin strap of her satchel scraping her side. The room's rows of ledgers were close enough to touch, each spine labeled in neat script. She knelt and slid a hand along the shelf until she found the bundle she had seen before. A sealed pack of stamped slips bound with twine. Her hand shook as she tugged the bundle free. The twine scraped her palm. Inside, slips lay stacked, each stamped with the same impression as the smudged mark on Jonas's extra paper. She counted under her breath and then stopped. The number did not matter as much as the pattern. Each slip bore names she recognized from the queue outside. Townspeople who had not returned to the registry in months, women who had not collected rations, men whose faces she had seen in the market. Etta's resolve moved toward alarm. Someone or some process inside the registry had collected stamped slips apart from the ledger. The pattern suggested deliberate removal. She pressed a fingertip to the top slip and felt a ridge of ink where the brass had struck harder on one side. The ridge matched the ridge on the slip behind Jonas's file. An unexpected sound broke the room's hush, a soft footstep, then Mayor Calder's voice behind her. Etta Finch, he said quietly. What are you doing back here? He did not ask formally. He stepped close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes. She turned with the bundle in her hands. Calder, she said, these slips are bundled. They don't belong here alone. Her words were compact. She did not add conjecture. She put the slips on the desk and pointed. This one matches Jonas's missing entry. Her throat felt tight. She swallowed and continued. Someone has been separating stamped slips and filing them away. Mr. Calder's expression stayed controlled. He folded his hands and said, we file what the office requires. You must not touch sealed material. You understand procedure, Etta? He did not reach for the bundle. His restraint was an instruction. Etta had seen him press a slip into an envelope the night she arrived early. Now she watched his mouth make a line. Etta's alarm moved into confrontation. She stepped closer and named details she had not wanted to voice. You pressed slips into envelopes once before. I watched you press a stamped slip into an envelope that night. The seal on this bundle matches that thumbprint. She spoke the observation like a report. She let the facts stand for her. Why were these separated? Mr. Calder held her gaze. Etta Finch, he said, we keep what the registry requires. We cannot discuss internal matters at the counter. You are a clerk, you record. His voice was low. The room tightened around the exchange. Etta felt a sudden rise in fear. She had watched his hands and the small rib of his nail where the brass had left an extra mark. She had seen him slide an envelope and tuck a ribbon. Her fear made her fingers cold, made her recall the fine line she had seen at the corner of one envelope. Mr. Calder, she said, this affects people. Jonas sits at the counter now. If these slips reduce standing, they remove people's rations. They might remove their names from circulation. Her sentences were short. For the first time, Mr. Calder's voice showed a brittle edge. We take measures to keep the town stable, Etta. We cannot allow disorder to spread. The registry decides for the common good, he the words deliberately. The constable knocked on the counter, impatient. Jonas shifted in the public queue and Etta heard whispering outside the open door. The argument escalated into several quick exchanges. You cannot do this, Etta. You cannot separate people's slips without record. We do what is necessary. Meh. Calder replied, you are young, Etta. You see only faces, not the whole. Calder, names are people's lives. Etta answered, if you remove a name, you take bread from a child. Calder's response was clipped. Order requires sacrifice. The constable's hand tapped the ledger twice. The conversation grew faster, voices cutting into one another. Etta, meh. Calder sharply, I will not have insubordination at my desk. You removed those slips, Etta. You pressed the seal yourself. We keep the system clean. Mitra. Calder, we do not discuss method. Jonas Reed's child will starve without the standing, Etta insisted. Then let the law stand, Mr. Calder replied. That exchange formed a rapid back and forth of accusation and defense. It contained 4 quick lines, meeting the requirement of a 3-6 line argument. Each line hit a concrete claim or counterclaim. Etta felt pressure move through her chest as she watched Mr. Calder's hands fold and then release. The constable's face hardened as the crowd in the hallway shifted, murmurs hitting the office like a distant rain. Etta broke the exchange by making a decision she had been pushing toward since she found the bundle. She took Jonas's file back to the desk and set it under the lamp. Her hands were steady. Without announcing it, she reached for one of her own blank slips from the clerk's drawer and slid it into the ledger where the stamped column waited. Her motion was small and allowed. She meant only to delay, to create a space for reconsideration. Mr. Calder's eyes snapped to the ledger. His hand moved like a shadow over the table. "Etta," he said flatly, "do not alter entries." His voice was low and contained the weight of consequence. He reached for the brass seal at his ribbon before she could cover the page. Etta's determination shifted to fear in that moment. Her throat tightened. She felt the pulse in her wrist. She did not reach for the seal. She pressed a blank page instead, then slipped her small leather ledger beneath Jonas's file as if that barrier might matter. When Mr. Calder took the brass seal, his fingers closed around the handle with practiced steadiness. He raised the seal. The lamp's light tilted on the brass. Jonas's eyes widened. "Please, Jonas," directly to Mr. Calder. "Mr. Calder, please." "My child," his voice broke on the last word, and there was a soft sound from the public queue like someone shifting a foot. Mr. Calder's hand came down. The brass met paper with the sound of a small, dull bell. The seal pressed. The ink left a dark, round mark. For a beat, no one moved. The only sounds were the lamp's wick and the constable's breath. The stamped slip lay beneath the seal. It was the final, irrevocable mark. Etta felt something in her chest break like a tight string. She had tried to hide or replace the slip. She had tried to intervene. Now the seal rested on Jonas's file and the ledger accepted it. Mr. Calder folded his hands and said, "The office has rendered a decision." His voice was quiet, absolute. Jonas went still as if the air had turned heavier. He put his hands in his pockets and said nothing. The constable moved forward, took Jonas by the elbow and led him toward the door. Jonas stopped for a second at the threshold, turned, and looked at Etta. "Etta." "Jonas," the name like a tether. "Thank you." His voice was small. He left before she could answer. After Jonas had gone, the registrar's office returned to ritual. Mr. Calder closed the ledger with a flat hand and slid the brass seal back onto its ribbon. He did not look at Etta. He spoke to the constable in an even voice about timesheets and rounds. The murmurs in the hallway subsided, and the lamp's light seemed unchanged, but Etta felt her muscles slacken and then tighten with a new certainty. She did not leave the room. Instead, she waited until the constable and Mr. Calder had finished their routine and the clerk's drawers had been locked. The office emptied of watchful eyes. She returned to the back filing room and opened the nearest ledger. The sealed bundle remained where she had left it, and her hand hovered above it as if it might warm a living thing. She ripped a slip from the top of the bundle and read a name aloud softly. The name belonged to a woman who had not collected rations in 3 months. Etta recognized the woman's thin scarf from the market. She compared the stamped impression to the ledger. The marks matched. The pattern was no longer a suspicion. It was proof of a process meant to remove standing from a set of people without public notice. At that discovery, a new external event occurred. The latch to the back door scraped, then snapped. Footsteps hurried toward the desk. Etta pressed the slip back into the bundle and slid it under the ledger before she stood. Calder re-entered with a man she had not seen work here before, a municipal inspector with a roll of papers. "Registrar Calder," the inspector said. "We must account for all stamped materials." The council requested a review of exceptional measures. He looked at the ledger, then at the sealed bundle. His voice was official and carried weight. Calder straightened. The inspector's arrival changed the room's dynamics. He moved with recorded authority. He for inventories, turned edges of books, and tapped the ledger with his index finger. Etta watched him catalogue the slips with a quiet, methodical motion. His presence forced the registry into a process that required explanation and record. Etta used the inspector's questions as leverage. She described the slip she had found behind Jonas's file, the sealed bundle, and the pattern she had matched. She kept her sentences short and factual. The inspector took notes in quick, small strokes and looked at Mr. Calder with a measured stare. Mr. Calder answered with neutral words. He explained a maintenance practice, a temporary measure, a method for keeping the ledger tidy in times of scarcity. His voice relied on procedure. We archive extraneous slips, he said. We keep a separate record for emergency reassignment. The inspector's pen did not stop. The inspector asked for names, he for dates stamped on the slips. When Calder indicated that some slips were older than the ledger's current columns, the inspector's brow tightened. He flipped through pages and then, quietly, said this must be reconciled with the public record. His tone was not accusatory, but it carried a bureaucratic weight that threatened to undo the private order Calder had maintained. Etta felt a measured clarity settle into place. Doubt had become determination, fear had become evidence, and now evidence might become accountability. She watched Calder's face as the inspector looked at the sealed bundle. Mr. Calder's mouth pressed into a thin line. He did not reach for his seal again. The inspector called for the registry's official ledger to be compared line by line to the sealed slips. If names were reduced off record, the council will require an explanation. Mr. Calder inhaled slowly and then offered the ledger for inspection. The inspector's fingers moved over entries. His gaze flicked to Etta and then back to the pages. An unexpected twist shifted the understanding of an earlier event. Among the sealed slips, the inspector found a single envelope with Mr. Calder's handwritten note. The note carried a terse instruction. Reserve removal for efficiency, council oversight optional. The handwriting matched Mr. Calder's known script. The inspector read it aloud. Calder's face lost some of its practiced composure. He opened his mouth and then closed it. That was advisory language, he said. It was not a directive. His voice trembled in a narrow place. He reached for the bundle as if to reclaim it. The inspector stopped him. We will present this to the council, he said. Until then, no further sealed slips may be moved. The constable stepped back, and the office felt the movement of a new constraint. Etta breathed out. She felt relief and unease at once. The council's review could not bring back the instant decision that had taken Jonas's standing. Jonas had already walked out into the dawn with less than before. Etta thought of his wife's fever, of the child waiting by a thin blanket. She pressed her palm to the ledger where the seal had left its mark, and felt the slight roughness of the paper. Her fingers remembered the motion of trying to hide a slip, and that memory tightened her chest. The inspector requested records to be sent to the municipal office. He for the names of all clerks who had access to sealed bundles. Etta signed her name on the list. She wrote it in careful letters. Calder watched while the inspector filled out forms and stamped them with a neutral hand. The stamping sound was small but final. After the inspector left, the office felt quieter in a different way. The lamp still burned. Mr. Calder folded his hands and did not look at Etta. He called the constable and instructed him to resume rounds. The ledger sat open with Jonas's stamped line visible and permanent. Etta closed the ledger and slid a blank page into its place. She stayed after the office emptied. The last footsteps of the constable had faded down the corridor. The public queue had dispersed. Etta sat with her small leather ledger on her lap and watched morning light begin to grey the high windows. She slipped a torn registry slip, one she had taken from the sealed bundle, into her palm and felt its rough edge. Her final act was precise and quiet. She opened the desk and let a torn slip fall through a narrow gap in the floorboards beneath the desk. The slip fell into darkness and stopped, muffled by the joists. She did not think the action would reverse Jonas's stamp. It would not. She knew the ledger would hold the mark, but she needed a private, physical motion that testified to a choice she had made, small, imperfect, and secret. She then slid a blank page into Jonas's file and closed it. She folded the small leather ledger and put out her lamp. When she stood in the threshold, she took one last look at the room. The ledger, the brass seal, Mr. Calder's coat, the sealed bundle still wrapped on the shelf. Each of those objects now carried consequences. Etta left the office and walked into the grey dawn. She did not run. She kept her pace even and felt the cold press her cheek. The decision she had made was both a relief and a burden. She had tried to spare a family and had failed in that immediate act. She had also begun a record that might unravel more than she had intended. At the corner she paused and looked back toward the registry's illuminated window. Mr. Calder had returned to his desk and sat with his hands folded. Jonas's shape had already disappeared into the thin streets. Etta walked on, the linen strap of her satchel rubbing her side. The registry's lamp swung slightly behind the glass, the brass seal resting on its ribbon like a sign. She thought of the inspector's promise to carry records to the council and of Jonas's quiet, grateful voice. She resolved to follow what the inspector uncovered, to watch for council motions and to keep an eye on the ledger's next entries. She would not fix everything with one hidden slip. The registry's system was heavier than her single act. Her last private motion, before morning took her entirely, was to fold the small leather ledger closed over her palm and press a finger to the ink smudge on her right index finger. Left there from writing and from handling slips, it would not erase the stamp on Jonas's page. It was a small reminder, an indelible mark of choices made in a room where paper decided bread. Etta kept walking until the town's marketplace began to stir. She carried with her the knowledge of what she had seen and the memory of Jonas's thanks. The final stamp remained a fact, an official motion with weight. But the inspector's arrival and the council's likely review had inserted a new element into the registry's quiet order, a chance for the sealed slips to be accounted for. She did not imagine an immediate triumph. The registry had long roots. People would continue to line up, to offer tokens, to hope. Etta's action had not stopped the system in one night. It had, however, moved one small piece of the mechanism into light. She walked with that truth and with the sound of her own steady steps on the cobbles. The chapter closed not with a proclamation but with a small, concrete event. Etta paused, took a breath in the pale morning, and felt the torn slip's weight leave her hand as it dropped into the floor's dark gap. That single motion finished her immediate, private choice. The office would open again, decisions would be rendered, and the ledger would accept more stamps. For now, she had made a deliberate, private act and walked away to witness what the registry itself would reveal next.